Hi folks, this is Bill Kasdorf. Welcome to the webinar. We're going to wait another minute or two because people are joining in as we speak here. So we're going to let it go for another minute or so. The little attendee counter keeps going up, so I'm going to still hang on for a minute here. Sorry to keep you waiting. Okay, I think we need to get started. We have a terrific attendance here, so welcome everybody. This is Bill Kasdorf, and this is the third in the Access Innovations Meaning Matters series of webinars. As I mentioned, terrific attendance, so I'm really glad that this subject is of interest to so many people, because it's not really about taxonomy like the other webinars have been. It's about really that the taxonomy isn't just for taxonomists, it's really valuable for giving you business insights. And so before we get going, some housekeeping details. Please use the question function in the webinar to submit questions. And Heather from Access Innovations will be monitoring the questions, and we'll get to those at the end of the webinar. If we don't get to your question, we will get back to you by email. And also a recording of this webinar will be available. And you'll be welcome to share that with others. So I would like to introduce Kristen Monahan, who is going to give you a dynamite presentation. She is the Business Analytics Manager at PLOS. Actually, her title is Senior Manager Data and Insights. And in the email I sent out, I pointed out what a great title that is, Data and Insights, because that's what this is really all about. I thought I had updated her title where it belonged, but I see I still got Business Analytics Manager in the text here, where she champions the decentralization and democratization of data and analysis. I love that. Prior to PLOS, she had filled various sales and operations roles at fashion accessory companies. So Kristen, over to you.
Thank you.
And Heather, I think you need to change the presenter status. There we go.
All right. Thanks, Bill, for the introduction. And I answer to just about any kind of title. Shorthand, I'm a business analyst. Longhand, I'm a data and insights senior manager. So a little bit about PLOS. We're a small, nonprofit open access publisher that's been around since the turn of this century. 7 journals, many scientific disciplines. PLOS One is our largest journal and helped pave the path for other mega journals. And about taxonomy at PLOS, so at submission, our PLOS One entire article is indexed. We get 12 terms on PLOS One submission. For the remaining 6 journals, it's the title and abstract only that's indexed, so usually up to 6 terms. And at publication, all articles are fully re-indexed, about 8 terms per article. So I'm super excited to be discussing taxonomy for business analysis. There's so much in this that honestly I was a little overwhelmed when I started to work on this presentation, where to start. So appropriately, we're going to go through the process I went through in determining the scope for today. We'll first look at PLOS's publicly available data on taxonomy terms, focusing on PLOS One publications. Then we'll start digging into trends that the business wants to understand, timing around workflow, volume of manuscripts, that kind of stuff. And after that, we'll look at trends I'm personally interested in after having dug around in the taxonomy for a bit. As an analyst, I strive to delight my customers by answering the questions they have and the ones they didn't know that they have. So first things first, you can find our full taxonomy on GitHub. Just Google PLOS thesaurus GitHub. It's that URL up at the top. My favorite export is the full XLSX. It shows our most up-to-date polyhierarchical list of terms, over 10,000 unique terms via 18,000 tabs. Also publicly available, but not Googleable, we have an accessible database of all of our published articles and related terms. So if you're anything like me, you could spend the next 2 years in this data and shirk all other responsibilities. But for this presentation, again, we're going to look at PLOS 1 terms from 2017 through Q3 of this year. So what do we have? We have a hot mess. We have 9,000 rows of narrow terms, so many volumes across those terms. And I divided the data up into quarters. That's how I tend to like to look at the business. So we'll be going through this webinar mostly in Excel using these GIFs or GIFs, however you want to pronounce it. But you could use another BI tool, you could use SQL. And we'll, at the second half of this session, we'll go through Sisense, which is PLOS's current BI tool. So in this GIF, I am doing the initial assessment of our terms. What do the volumes look like? Should I be looking at total volume for the entire time period? Should I be sorting highest to lowest on the most recent quarter? It really depends on what you're looking for. Up at that top row, I have the number of DOIs we published in PLOS 1 in each quarter. So since there are almost 9,000 terms used over 15 quarters, for this exploration, I'm going to look at terms that have at least an average of 10 hits per quarter or 150 hits for this time period. That gives us a much more manageable list of about 800 terms. So here you can see like where I'm starting to just assess what I'm looking at. It's a mix of quant and art. Here you can see COVID-19 populating in 2020. This, I will be impressed if you can see, but I just wanted to show you how crazy and rose and columny this can all get. Right here, I created on the second half, on the right half of the spreadsheet, quarter over quarter increase, decrease. So, okay, great. You know, we couldn't have predicted that COVID-19 was going to increase this year, or we could have predicted that COVID-19 terms were going to increase this year since it didn't exist last year. But what about other terms? PLOS 1 publications have been in decline since 2016. You know, are there any terms bucking that trend? I want to see quarter over quarter changes so I can drill into the interesting. So we're going to dig into these 10 terms, and I promise I'm almost done with the tables. I picked out a handful of interesting terms based on increase in volume. You could do this kind of analysis with other measures as well, like time to first decision, accept rate, etc. Full disclosure though, I picked terms I could pronounce and define. So moving over into Sisense, this is our BI tool at PLOS currently. So we know that there are 8 terms on each published article. So the terms I'm digging into aren't necessarily the only thing that the paper's about, but it's a good approximation. So what else can we glean from these volume trends? Top institutions, top countries, number of authors. What subject areas did the author choose at the time of submission? So here we're looking at COVID, now we're looking at employment, noticing that US and China generally are the top 2 most voluminous countries that publish with PLOS 1, but depending on the term, other countries will kind of vie for the top 5 spaces, or top 5. Here, I'm trying to look at Author Institute. This is a real live GIF of me trying to find if a pie chart is a good way to look at institutions. It is not. So I went with tables, kind of zipping up and down, nothing very interesting, but this is the kind of exploration that I really enjoy doing. So, what did the authors choose at the time of submission? Medical risk factors could mean a whole lot of things. How did the authors choose to categorize their papers? A number of them chose public health and epidemiology, but in a broader, at a broader categorical level, some chose medicine and health and some chose social sciences. So there's different ways to dig into these index articles. What about diet? Diet seems pretty broad. And again, sorry, forgive me for reverting back to tables. I just really love rows and columns, but diet as pertains to agriculture. So we're probably thinking livestock versus nutrition and public health and epidemiology. So taking it the other way. So time to first, this is a number of publications, median time to first decision, median time to publish, number of unique editors during this time period, and the average publications per editor. What do these things mean, if anything? COVID-19, whoops, that's interesting. COVID-19 papers processed more quickly than other terms during this time period, which makes sense. Does speed to first decision normal for paper in chemistry versus biochemistry? Which one is faster? Which one is slower? What is normal? So you can do all that trend analysis looking this way. But we're going to move over to SciSense for a live demonstration. So I am going to switch to this one. Wonderful. So this dashboard that I created in SciSense, again, rows and tables. I know your audience, but this is, we could have done a lot of bar charts and stuff, but there's just so many words and I much prefer reading row by row. So this is where after I was planning this presentation, this is what I landed on. I initially started with like, okay, I know that the US is the largest publisher with PLOS 1. Okay, cool. But what about one of these other big ones? And can we drill into any of the scientific disciplines that they're interested in? So with Brazil, I wanted to just show we've got, I imagine many folks on the call also have some disambiguation problems with their institutes. So forgive us for not having addressed that yet. But with Brazil, just in a cursory glance, it looks like we've got a number of papers on ecology, plant sciences. I like to use insights to kind of like double check and hone in where our taxonomy crosses over with them. We've got inflammation, gene expression. Generally, terms under genetics aren't necessarily that indicative, but if we scoot on over to genomics, which is a tier 3 term. So those of you who are already familiar with polyhierarchical taxonomies, you'll understand why I'm going into different tiers. We have a lot of crossover with genomics and plant sciences, understandably genetics and heredity. We have a few very specific institutes across the world that publish with us in genomics. So what does that mean for our business? Should we be marketing to these organizations for more genomics papers? Should we be branching out? These are the kinds of insights that we share with our marketing and editorial teams. Likewise, so neuroscience, we have a number of neuro terms that roll up to neuroscience. So I was surprised. I actually, as I was like mucking around in this spreadsheet or in this dashboard, I was thinking, oh, okay, there's a number of terms that could really align with other broad categories from other vendors. We have a number of neuroscience, very specific focused institutions on neuroscience, generally out of the UK, Canada, Sweden. Love digging into diabetes. As expected, a lot of it's around endocrinology and metabolism. Did not expect to see a Korean institution at the top, nor a Taiwanese one. And you can see here, I'll explain this K rank momentarily. K is short for Kristen. You can just, again, do calls for papers. Is this particular slice of endocrinology, does this move faster? Do we get more submissions? What's the accept rate, etc. And again, that interesting to me Korean institution, we'll take a look at this one. We see that they publish a lot of oncology papers with us, but going down to narrow terms, see a lot of surgical and invasive medical procedures. So if we were to then take surgical and medical procedures and decide, kind of flip around and go back into that term and see what other institutions and countries are publishing with us there. Let me just turn off this filter. We can see there's a cross-section of a lot of cross-section with oncology, surgery, but also ophthalmology. So let me turn that off. And here, I just want to let you know what this K rank is. It's my way of saying that the number of unique terms per country and second tier times the number of publications, they're weighted equally. So I want to see which, if there are any kind of outliers or things that pop out at me that I just didn't expect. China and genetics, which is probably plant genetics. Japan and cell biology. Oh yeah, look at this. See, I'm excited again, and I've already gone through this enough times that I should not be excited by anything I'm seeing. China and neuroscience. So this is all I've got in terms of prepared for this presentation, opening up for questions and conversations.
Great, and I think, let's see here, we're back to me. Margie from Access Innovations has some comments because obviously it's their technology under the hood that's powering a lot of this. So Margie, I don't think you have slides, but the floor is yours.
I don't have slides, but I have to say that was a whirlwind presentation. Kristen obviously thinks faster than a lot of us do.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, I agree.
So I have a number of questions and a couple of comments, but the first one is, when you talk about the TTP and the TTFD, or is it P, could you explain those a little bit more to us?
Certainly. Time to first decision and time to publication. So we found through analysis, through taxonomical analysis, that it's very normal for our papers to process at different times on PLOS one, between the physical sciences and the life sciences. So in determining what is normal and really what to worry about. If a physical science paper is running a week behind a life science paper, that's okay. It might be something that we need to address by finding additional editors, but it might also just be the discipline that the paper is in. It just requires more, a longer processing reviewer editor time.
So are you feeding this information to the reviewer group as well? And you might, because I think it's unique to PLOS, talk about reviewer and editor, as opposed to other people's definition of peer reviewer.
Sure, we feed this information to our editors, both our staff editors and I believe also our volunteer editors, for lack of a better phrase. So our volunteer editors are aware of sort of what the basic metrics are for the disciplines that they are interested in or work within. I do not think that we share this information with our reviewers. I'm sorry, was there a follow-up question in there?
No, that was well, because it seemed to me that you call your reviewers are also sometimes called editors. It's a different application of the terminology, I think. Yes.
Okay, sure. We have on PLOS One, we have approximately 10,000 associate volunteer editors, and then those folks reach out to a further group of volunteer reviewers, and then we also have staff editors.
So that's a huge group to monitor.
Yes. Yes.
And so really the other side of my question was, do you share the information from your rankings with the people who manage the editors, both internal and external?
Great question. I used to, until the teams that manage the ed board got so good at doing their own analysis, I don't have much of a hand in it. We built a data model and are rebuilding our data ecosystem so that any member of our PLOS staff who is analytically inclined can do their own analysis, assuming we set up the data models appropriately.
Well, that's very empowering. You're still at 8 terms per article. Do you ever think about maybe indexing deeper or indexing with less terms, because it's a totally arbitrary number, how many terms the MAI assigns? So.
Absolutely. I think so. One of the exercises / projects we did with Access Innovations last year was to re-index at what I'll call a subject level our entire PLOS One submitted corpus from 2010 forward to get a better understanding of the broader disciplines. So up until 2018, we only had authors at submission choose very broad categories: medical and life sciences, physical sciences, mathematics, social sciences. In 2019, we started we offered PLOS One authors, I think, a list of about 150 slightly more specific subjects to choose from. But there was no way to do past analysis because we didn't have like for like. So we, much like with the community journals and the flagship journals at PLOS, we asked Access Innovations to index all of the PLOS One titles and abstracts with a much narrower taxonomy than the 10,000 terms we have in our current taxonomy. That gives us the ability to slice into interdisciplinary subjects like surgical oncology. We are able to break down cell biology into, say, 5 subcategories instead of it just being cell biology. So it's a long-winded answer, but we've thought about it. But what became more valuable to us is actually a broader tagging of submissions, so then we could analyze all of our various key performance indicators.
So when you showed your tiers 1, 2, and 3 for the terms, were those from your narrower taxonomy, or are those the broad, the newer and subset or broader taxonomy?
That is the broader taxonomy. That's all 10,000 terms, because in there, I think we would lose if in that narrower taxonomy, or excuse me, the one with fewer terms, we wouldn't have things like COVID and the COVID-19 term. So we need to be able to report against very specific phenomena, for lack of a better term, diabetes, Alzheimer's, various diseases whose names we all know, and that would get lost in the higher level indexing process.
I've got a related question for you, Kristen. Sorry to interrupt, Margie. Well, back to you in a second, but it's pertinent here. If you could explain, I guess what I'm trying to get at is what level of the taxonomy is, and I think this is, you've been talking about this, but I just want to be really clear with the attendees that the level of specificity that you're asking from for an author to relate to or for an editor to relate to versus the level of specificity that the machine indexing done by the Access Innovations technology is doing. Because obviously a human being isn't going to be able to manage a 10,000 term taxonomy, right? So I just want to get a sense of proportion there about, because you're talking about authors associating terms on submission or on acceptance, but clearly that's must be a much more limited set of terms, but it may want specificity beyond those just very high level categories. So you see what I'm trying to get at?
Totally. So if I may, I can turn my dashboard back on. And
I think Heather will need to make you presenter again because I think I'm still presenting.
You can see my dashboard again?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Oh, I'm not seeing it. Why am I not seeing it?
I see it.
So you guys, y'all get a view into.
Now I'm seeing it, sorry.
So we have large, broad section names that are 1 of 10, and then subsections with the authors can choose 3 of. Although frankly, a number of authors just go for the very first one in the dropdown. So we have a large number of agriculture papers, which are probably miscategorized. Let's see here. But we can double check that by using the taxonomy to find out where those errors are. So let me go to table deprecation. That. All right. So we have, well, that's not very helpful. Okay, ooh, cool. All right. So medicine and health sciences, authors have chosen the broad category. A number of them have chosen public health and epidemiology. But that, so from a business analyst perspective, if I'm wondering about profit margin per subsection. So back to your introduction, I come from widgets, I come from shoes specifically. If we want to understand the profit margin on a pair of sneakers versus a pair of sandals, we can do so. If PLOS or any other organization wanted to chase business, search out submissions based on discipline, you'd probably want to find out what those profit margins are based on like how much time is spent on processing papers, et cetera. But here, so public health and epidemiology is great from a business analysis and finance planning perspective, from my opinion. But from an editorial perspective, this doesn't mean a heck of a whole lot, especially when you've got 10,000 editors and probably 80 to 100 of them, if not more, dabble in public health. So we've got some terms. Ooh, cool. All right, see, I didn't even know this stuff was happening. So now when we add the narrowest term to our papers that have been published, we've got psychology and behavior coming up the most frequently. Then we've got emotions, eyes, ooh, ophthalmology, cognition, etc. So it's pretty hard to do KPIs and metrics against 10,000 terms. A lot easier to do against subsections, which are subjectively, hopefully objectively, but subjectively chosen by our authors. And then tier 2 for us in our polyhierarchical taxonomy has about 185 terms. if I remember correctly. And tier 3 has something more like 1,000, which is still manageable. However, not everybody wants to spend their lives in rows and columns. I'm okay with 1,000 rows if we're looking at tier 3 terms. Most people aren't. So my team and I are creating this data model in this ecosystem to support various analytics outputs, whether that's Tableau, Excel, Google Sheets, advanced analytics like data science, so that the future of our business planning will look more like a network diagram than rows and columns. Where is that, can we color, how are public health papers related to psychology papers, related to infectious diseases, if at all? What are the overlapping institutions? What are the other overlapping KPIs? Time to find editors, time to get reviews in, time to publish, time to accept, time to reject. All of those intermingled metrics get to be pretty complicated when you're only looking at rows and columns. So very interested in seeing how we can move forward with like network diagrams.
Kristen, while you're on that screen for analytics, what is PLOS?
Oh, this is so Sisense. Sisense is our BI tool that we use at PLOS currently. So Pulse is one of the features of Sisense, which gives you an alert when something hits the number you want it to. Did we get 100 submissions yesterday? Yes, it will ping you.
So tell me where this fits in the PLOS ecosystem overall.
Taxonomy in general?
Taxonomy and these analytics that you support.
Certainly. We look at taxonomy and various ways of indexing papers and people, generally to match people with papers, but also to match people with people. So just make myself giggle. Clustering. We're trying to cluster like people and like papers in order to get our authors' research out faster. So within the ecosystem, not only are we focusing on improving our disambiguation process, we are also looking at how to use taxonomy and other indexing processes as sort of bags of words or other machine learning NLP best practices around clustering and segmentation. Segmentation is generally how I think of it in terms of marketing. So if we have a calls for paper on maternal health, which we've had, how do we find everyone in our CRM system who is at least tangentially related to maternal health?
And so does that mean you send a call to papers directly to individuals rather than posting it broadly?
Both.
Both, okay.
Yep, you want to do targeted messaging as well as general messaging.
Great.
The image that you have.
Any more from Margie?
Well, the image that you have showing at the bottom of the screen is countries. And is that reflective of the size of the contribution from the country to PLOS?
Yes, and considering whatever filters I have on the side. So if I want to turn genomics on for us to take a look at genomics, we see US and China are changing shape. If this were, Sisense doesn't have a particularly pretty map widget, otherwise I would have used a map. So we could take a look at genomics. So generally, US and China tend to be number 1 and 2 for us no matter what we choose. So I like to look at like the next 8. So seeing where Germany comes up, Brazil, Korea. Let's see, we can choose really anything. Do you want to look at something specifically?
How about COVID?
All right, let's do that. For those of you out there who are BI and analysts, BI professionals and stuff, the filters, the native filters on Sisense are ORs only. There are no ands, which is a bit of a bummer, which is why you see me turn terms on and off. Whoa! We'll just pretend that didn't happen. Let's see here. I wonder what I did. This is definitely user error. Oh, because I only have 2019. So here we go. So for us,
on it before 2019.
yeah, totally, that makes sense. But the UK, if we drill down into countries, Italy, which generally isn't in our top 10 when taking a look at disciplines, shows up in our top 10.
Mm-hmm.
You could then do something like, okay, so Kristen, if Italy doesn't show up, let's click on Italy, turn off COVID-19, and see what terms pop up. Generally, this is kind of noise because of the number of unique terms that we have in our taxonomy around these. They always pop up, but neuroscience, physics comes up, and then our top universities during this time. In terms of publications, very cool. Ooh, sports sciences, didn't know that. And you can just keep digging around. There are definitely more disciplined ways to do analysis. Any of you who know me personally know that I'm not particularly disciplined, so I like the whole like scatter, see what's interesting and dig in. But you can absolutely do disciplined analysis to figure out which institutions and countries, authors, depending on how long your business has been around, are doing what with what and how quickly.
It sounds to me like you're more in discovery mode most of the time rather than responding to specific requests.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, for me, totally. But again, we have such talented teammates throughout the organization that marketing, editorial board management tend to do their own analysis. I am very much the person who counts things, but may not know exactly, what does clinical neurology encompass? That's okay that I don't know that. But if clinical neurology is trending, or a subdiscipline within that is trending, editorial, ed board management, and marketing are on it and will respond appropriately, whether that's through calls for papers or finding additional volunteers or something else.
That's interesting, because that's actually just the question I was about to ask, because obviously you live and breathe this stuff. But what you've just said now is that actually lots of people within the PLOS organization actually do this analysis work themselves, and the tools apparently are workable for them. They are not taxonomy experts, and they're not necessarily BI experts, right? But they are able to get business insights for whatever they're doing. If they're on an editorial board, or to what level does this get? Does it get down to an author, somebody managing peer review of a certain discipline?
Yeah, it can go down to a single human being for sure. Trying to find, let's say, papers around maternal health, any editors we may have invited and who may have declined because they were busy. Same with reviewers, authors related to those authors who wrote that paper on maternal health or wrote a series of papers on maternal health. It goes deep. It's as deep as you'd like it to be. I tend to get lost in it because it's so much fun. But the ed board, the team that manages the ed board, has a set of KPIs and measures that are updated regularly so that we're balanced with volunteer staff and workflow. Whereas my stuff is definitely, like you said, more exploratory.
Yeah, and that actually gets to another question I had, which is the extent to which you report these things. In other words, you know, a lot of this you're doing for your own edification, right? You're analyzing this because you need to understand things, right? But
Absolutely.
I imagine that for an editorial board, they get regular reports of a certain kind. And do you ever report the results of this kind of analysis publicly? Do you write about it? Do you blog about it? Does it ever get outside of PLOS?
We don't. We could. I prefer things to be exact when I'm reporting about something. So I've been at PLOS now for a little over 5 years. So the fact that we can't tell if we're selling purple shoes or red shoes still kind of drives me a little nuts. It's the reporting against our subsections, disciplines, however you want to call it, in PLOS, I think is less important than the discoverability of the individual and related articles themselves. So even though this talk is called Taxonomy Beyond Search, there is still, there is obviously an enormous value to search and taxonomy. Yeah.
It looks like we have a few audience questions that Heather can give us.
Yep.
Yes, we do. The first question is SciSense a commercially available BI tool or something PLOS developed?
It is commercially available. They have offices in Arizona, New York, and Israel, but I don't remember which city. It is for whoever asked that, it is a soup to nuts solution. You do all of your data modeling in the back end of SciSense, and then there's a data viz layer on the front, which you're seeing right here.
Great. And Larry is just curious, is your indexing by humans, machine, or a combination of the two?
Absolutely a combination of the two. Reason librarians still have jobs. Human curation is incredibly valuable, especially as we, in this decade, start to realize how biased AI can be, that just reassessing our corpus is appropriate, both human and machine.
That's a whole nother topic on how biased AI can be, but it really can. It's amazing. So if you work from your own data, it's a whole lot better than trying to enforce outside thoughts. We just had quite a discussion internally about that on the subject of COVID, actually, because there are some names for COVID that some people consider derogatory, but they are synonyms. And so if you don't include them, you kind of miss that group, even though the term itself is offensive to some. So it's just it's an interesting process to go through.
The next two are more comments, and I think the discussion may have covered them. Asking authors to allocate 12 or 8 terms per article seems rather arbitrary. Some articles will need more or fewer terms to index them adequately, depending on the subject and level of generality. And authors are often not best fitted to index their articles if there is to be consistency in indexing across many sources. So do either of you want to comment on that?
Totally. So sorry for the confusion. Authors are not choosing the 6 to 12 terms that are on the paper. Those are machine indexed. We are asking authors to subjectively, hopefully objectively, choose the very broad sections that they fit in. So is it medicine? Is it life sciences? Is it physical or chemistry? And then within those, is your life science paper about biochemistry, cell biology, etc. But from there, the specific concepts are indexed by the machine.
Do you expect to find the need to start new journals based on the analysis, such as for terms or disciplines that are continually increasing?
I am not the right person to talk about that.
I know
I guess
that
the more broader answer to that is a publisher could definitely use it for that purpose, whether PLOS does or not, right?
Absolutely.
and some publishers do use that as a way to figure out whether a new journal on some topic should be considered because they get a lot of papers that they don't currently fit into a journal that they're publishing, and maybe that's a trend that they want to consider for a new publication.
Yeah, PLOS is actually, well, I'm sure I don't have to point this out to this audience, but it's an unusual publisher in that it publishes an enormous amount of content with not very many journals, whereas there are a lot of publishers that have just a gazillion journals. So it's just kind of a different way of looking at the publishing enterprise.
Yeah, they're very broad, broad scientific publisher, interesting and broad base, especially for PLOS One.
Right.
Absolutely.
Okay, could you please explain briefly about how you govern the taxonomy? Is there any process for indexers to request candidate terms when they don't find that term in the taxonomy?
We use Access Innovation as both our taxonomist and the system behind it. There are methods to recommend / suggest additions or changes to the thesaurus. Yes. But Margie, do you want to take that one?
Just to add to what you said, because as new terms are suggested, either from the population in general, but more likely from the search logs and from the analyses that you've seen from the reviewers, we can get additional ones. It's also interesting that on the PLOS One website, for example, people can vote for a term and people can add suggested terms, and that's a very interesting way to get additional term suggestions, which is unique, I think, still unique to PLOS. So there are a number of directions, plus some intermittent sampling. I mean, when COVID came up, for example, it was clear that we needed to add that as a new popular topic. So in general, watching for them as well. But those terms came in not just from our watching for them, but also from the other sources that are already established.
So I guess what I'm hearing is that it's part of the taxonomist job at AI, at Access Innovations. Part of their job is monitoring search results and how do they, what are they paying attention to see if new terms, are they very discipline specific, or are these taxonomists across this and handling the entire taxonomy?
Well, I would say that they have a scientific bent, but because PLOS is a scientific nature thesaurus, so that's where we would put the effort. But the terms are gathered both from the PLOS content itself, because we're not going to add any term to the PLOS thesaurus unless there are actual articles to index with it. Just because it's an interesting term does not mean that it's going to be added to the thesaurus. It must have content, because people don't want to have null hits popping up.
So are you like, would the term text mining be appropriate there, that you're actually, in effect monitoring the content itself for relevant terms that suddenly are occurring frequently?
Yeah, we are, but we aren't. Traditional text mining is more heavily done at the beginning of a project. For us, when we're building a taxonomy, when the case of an established taxonomy like PLOS, because there is a user community, there is a reviewer community, there is a searcher community, and there's the general scientific news at large. So sampling from the thesaurus, getting feedback from the website, getting feedback from the reviewers, getting feedback from the search logs really gives us a very good stream that is on the pulse of the content of that particular publisher, in this case, PLOS.
That makes lots of sense. Yeah, thank you. That sounds great.
Yeah, if we were going to mine the content, then that would involve probably a lot of data mining techniques that are certainly things we use, but they aren't warranted for the maintenance on this particular project.
Yeah, because you've got a very knowledgeable user base, both publication, users publishing the content and users consuming the content. So those are that's where you look for for new terms that are needed.
Correct.
That makes total sense. Those are the right people to be governing that.
Okay, next question. Are you using, quote, number of unique terms, end quote, to indicate breadth of coverage, a good thing, or inconsistency in indexing, a bad thing?
Great question. I think, so let me just making sure I'm understanding the question correctly. Are we counting the number of terms that say roll up to microbiology in a paper to understand if that paper is about microbiology? Whether or not that was the question, that's the question I'm going to answer. The number of terms per tier 2 or tier 3 widely vary. Organisms have more than 790 unique terms, whereas military engineering may only have 1 or 2. So what becomes out of those, that denominator of 8, what makes a paper about that subsection is one of the more difficult things to answer, which is one of the reasons we started having authors choose from 150 subsections or so. You could absolutely do that math, and I've tried, and I'd say it's 65% accurate, 70% accurate, which is good enough for directional decisions, but maybe not good enough for like formal business decisions.
Well, and we find that the terms that are returned for the automatic indexing are already weighted. They're weighted by the number of times that they're called or cited within the article itself. And that gives us some indication of what the article is about as well. So we can certainly roll up, and there's redundancy in the initial suggestions, but what's chosen and presented as suggested terms in an assisted mode or as the indexing selected in an automated mode are already pretty heavily pre-selected by the content itself.
And Margie, when you're talking about, recognizing terms, this is in the context of the fact that you have a taxonomy and a thesaurus. So am I right that when you're talking about a term, you're not just talking about a particular way of expressing a concept, but you're talking about that concept, which might have several variants of the way it might be referred to in the literature. Is that right?
That's right. There's a synonymy base as well. And we also index to what's called the most specific layer, which is real important in science. So if the concept could say it was a 3-tier taxonomy, the concept could be pulled at any number of layers, and we want to be sure that it's the tier that's most appropriate to the article that is selected as the index term.
Makes sense.
Another question about Scisense. Can many analysts get by using nothing other than Excel for data and insights? How highly do you recommend investing in dedicated software such as Scisense?
I'd say it depends on the size of your organization or the team that needs or wants access to this information. Coming into PLOS years ago was and continued to be incredibly impressed with my colleagues and their analytical sort of native know-how. So it made sense that we did not hinder people's ability to do their own analysis by having just one team, internal, like one small team trying to answer all of the questions. I also came into PLOS without a BI system and quote unquote broke Excel. I live and breathe by Excel, but Excel can't do more than 1 million rows, and it starts to not work after like 500,000 rows. So it really depends on like how the volume of your data and how specific you're trying to get. If you've got a lot of data, you can absolutely run your business on Excel and on your business and analytics on Excel, but it does become more difficult to decentralize using Excel versus, say, a BI system with a robust data model, data warehouse behind it.
Okay, and this question is 3 questions in one. It's rather long. How do you quality control which subjects that authors select? How do you maintain consistency when you have authors from varying backgrounds? I work with a taxonomy that covers topics that are more subjective than what you're working with. Do you ever override what an author selects?
I am aware of there being more than a handful of times that we override what an author selects, where I'll say probably the most frequent overridence, let's make up some words, is agriculture, because it shows up first alphabetically. Someone may not realize that there's a veterinary sciences or I don't know, a limnology category, and they're like, agriculture, good enough. The subjective nature, though, of these subsections is still appropriate. We do want to have that balance of human and machine indexing until hopefully the machine gives us what we want it to. But I'm not sure we even know what that is.
I can add, some people use the full taxonomy. Actually, a lot of people use the full taxonomy as part of their author submission system. And what we have found is that authors have a rather inflated thought about what their paper's about. Many of those systems use 20 as the number of terms suggested rather than 8. And a lot of authors will just choose them all. So it is important to consider the author selections, and I think an increasing number of organizations are going either with just the top levels of the taxonomy or a special taxonomy like Kristen has, so that they don't get overwhelmed with erroneous choices from the authors.
Any more questions, Heather? We're getting to the top of the hour here.
That was the last question.
You
did it.
Perfect. Well, maybe you should switch back to giving me my screen control. There we go. So just a reminder that we're all available here for contact, and the recording will be available. About how long does that take, Heather, for that to be available?
It takes us a couple days. So
and
probably
will all the people who registered for the webinar get an email reminding them that the recording's available?
Yes, once it's posted, I'll send an email to everyone that's registered.
Great. And what about Kristen's PowerPoint? Is that available?
Yes, let me just clean it up. There's some super casual notes in there. Let me just clean that up, and then please.
Yes, I will point out to people that you will be dazzled by that PowerPoint, because those screens have minds of their own. It's amazing. You advance to the next slide, and suddenly it's changing before your eyes, because it's a dynamic GIF, basically, isn't it? So anyway, it's a very, very cool slide deck. Yeah. Some people will want to get that and say, how the heck did she do that?
Happy to share my secrets.
Good. Well, thank you everybody for hanging in for this. A long discussion, but a very interesting one. I hope you enjoyed it. And we are just past the top of the hour, so thanks again. And we'll follow up as needed. All of our contacts, all four of us are here. Thanks again. Bye-bye.